Hi, I'm Steve Clemons, and I have a question. China is playing a bigger role in the Middle East than ever, but can it compete with the United States to be a peacemaker between the Palestinians and Israelis? Let's get to the bottom line. Last year, after years of hostility between Iran and Saudi Arabia, China was able to get both sides to agree to a détente, something that the United States was either unable or unwilling to do. Now, with the war on Gaza in its 9th month, China has presented itself as a major power that's less biased towards Israel than the West. Beijing has criticized Israel for going well beyond self-defense and argued before the World Court that the Palestinian use of force to resist oppression is their right and cannot be equated with terrorism. For years, China has been expanding its economic footprint and criticizing the world order run by Washington. But will that translate to a bigger diplomatic and military role for Beijing in the Palestine-Israel conflict? Today, we're talking with Wang Huiyao, president of the non-governmental think tank, the Center for China and Globalization, and he's former advisor to the China State Council, which is China's cabinet. Dr. Wang, thank you so much for joining us today. I know this is going to be an unusual show because, typically we're talking about what Washington thinks about the world. Now I'm really interested in what Beijing is thinking about the Israel-Gaza conflict, other conflicts, and, really China's role in the world. And so I'd love to get your take on the Israel-Gaza conflict, how Xi Jinping and the Chinese leadership and the Chinese population is looking at this conflict right now from your point of view.
Thank you, Steve, for this show. Actually, I think that while this war has been dragged on for quite some time now, it's more than half a year, and it's really devastating to see people suffer there, and also that the whole world is watching this in their living room on a daily basis. Yet we cannot solve that this crisis. I think the Chinese position, government position, of course, is very clear. China, at the very beginning, condemns all kind of violence or attacks on civilians. I mean, that's very clear for China. But China actually would like to see, this is not really go over beyond, the tolerance of the human, security, because we see large casualties of civilians. We see there's a humanitarian crisis happening, and then we see there's so much international efforts, international consensus, UN resolutions wants to bring this war to a ceasefire. Yet we still have not seen that happening. That's really disappointed I think to many Chinese, and I'm really dismayed to the world to see this war still continue. So we hope that we're going to really see a ceasefire. We're going to see some peacemakings going on, and we see that the whole world community and of course China can work with them to really stop this crisis that is really happening already for too long and too large scale beyond the imagination.
I was interested in various Chinese leaders' statements that, from their perspective, that Israel's actions right now in Gaza have gone beyond the rationale of self-defense. And I think that's a pretty bold statement, from, compared to others that China has made. And I mean, to be honest, I think there are Americans that may rightly or wrongly, they think they're fair to both sides. They think they're fair to Palestinians and that they want, to protect Palestinians, but they have this relationship with Israel that seems to have no boundaries. I'm interested in how you see this and whether you see America in sort of a hypocritical moment and whether or not China is willing to weigh in more greatly to basically to say to Israel, back off.
Well, it's quite possible. I think that that is exactly happening. The U.S. used to be the war policeman. Of course, they are trying to maintain the certain post-war war order, but they are really looks very, very incompetent now, and particularly on this crisis, we see the double standard probably applied to this situation. Certainly, there is a large influence of course, of Israel in the United States, but then we even see that the influence is diminishing, and particularly for Prime Minister Netanyahu, actually still hanging on the power there, and the war is really beyond what the necessary, of course, to retaliate. I think there's over 10 times more probably casualties, or even 20 times more, which is way beyond imagination. The suffering of the humanitarian people, the relocation of 1.5, 2 million Palestinians on the Gaza Strip. And particularly, we are seeing this crisis going on: the hunger, the casualties, the children, the women, and all those sufferings that displayed on the daily basis in your living room is really beyond people's imagination. So I think China actually, of course, step up its effort. China has been talking to all the parties. Particularly recently, China has a minister summit of Arab minister meeting with Chinese leaders, and I think China has really hopefully that we should really solve this fundamentally with two-state solutions, with really stop the fight and have a ceasefire. Let's get a UN resolution in place and really to put this to the end. This is really really alarming, and I think unbearable probably with such a crisis going on, with such a large casualty of civilians, which is really totally beyond control. I think that is really very unfortunate, very tragic. I think Chinese government is and Chinese people is really getting more and more, really much attention on this crisis now, and wants to get involved and wants to help. Absolutely, there's a great desire on the Chinese side to really want to see the peacemaking going on. Actually, recently, the Chinese government has announced they're going to donate 500 million RMB for the humanitarian aid to the people in Gaza, and really calling for open all the channels, open all the rescue packages, and really see the situation improve and see the crisis stop.
We all woke up in Washington, D.C. one day to the news that China had played this key role in normalizing relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And I tell you, it was a whiplash effect. People said, my goodness, that was sort of America's terrain. That's sort of what we did. And China, in a way, jumped into a role that we hadn't seen before. I'd love to get your insights in not only with Israel-Gaza, but China's kind of new diplomatic mission around the role in surprising ways, and what is driving that right now?
Absolutely, I think China now has actually increased its soft power, so to speak, using the Joseph Nye's term, because China, now has opened up, and the last 45 years, China grew into the second largest economy, and China has become the largest trading nation with over 120 countries. So the world stability and prosperity is vital to China's growth and prosperity as well. So what has happened is that China, of course, for example, you mentioned about made the peace deal for Saudis and Iranians, which is great, because China is the largest trading nation with both countries. China buys largely all their 90% probably their export of energies to China and to the world probably, and then that's really a big influence. So I think that the Arab nation, particularly from Saudis and probably from Middle East, from the Iranian point of view, they also don't want to see their agonizing positions. They want to have a ladder to come down. And then they don't want to do it through the U.S. or EU, because they were involved. The U.S. was involved in the wars and in many conflicts in the Middle East. So they need somebody nice and clean, need somebody credible, and somebody never had invaded or never had occupied any of their territories. And then China is the largest trading nation with all of them, and it's very natural for them to come to China, and China is willing to engage more to make the peace. It's to the Chinese interest and also to the world prosperity. So I think that's what has happened for making this deal between Israel and between the Iranian and Saudis, because China is really wants to show that they are friendly with both countries. So when China says, please don't do it, please let's stop, give me face, stop it. And then they probably would do, because they respect China. as largest trading nation for both of their countries. So I see that happening actually in the Middle East, even for the Gaza conflict. China is the largest trading with all the Arab nations. China is the second largest trade nation with Israel. I think China used to maintain both good relations with both Arab and Israel, and probably the time will come for China to step in and say, look, let's really come to the end. Let's really solve this issue and find a solution to that. And probably China, particularly now with Global South, would have more influence now. China recently did something with Brazil on a 6-point peace plan for Ukrainian and Russian conflict. And I had a Turkish foreign minister come to CCG a few days ago in Beijing and saying that Turkey is also would like to work with China to help on those conflict in the Middle East or in Russian or on Ukraine. So I think there's a lot of things that China can play a more active peacemaking and peace mediating role now than used to be. So I think it's also because China has a vested interest to see a more prosperous, more stable, more peaceful world that is really benefiting both China and the world.
Do you think there's a pathway with international institutions to be more effective in these conflicts? Because I have to tell you, my view is Secretary General wants it, can't do it. Is there a resolution besides just having constant paralysis in some of these, horrible bleeding ulcers in the world that involve real people's lives?
Absolutely. I think that, organizations like UN and, also Security Council could do much more. Absolutely. The problem I see that now is that we're having all those problems in the world, so much conflict. On top of that, climate change. I saw Secretary Guterres was mentioned today, we should stop using all those fuel and the gasoline advertisement and things like that. So there's more challenges facing. Even AI has become uncertain in many aspects. So I think the big power, major power, should really gather their act together and work together. For example, at the issue of the Gaza, I would really say that why can't we send the UN peacekeeping force to station there and actually separate the conflict, the parties, and then making sure that there's a two-state solution being implemented. Because, so the fundamental challenge is that those big powers sometimes have different views. They actually have a conflict among themselves, the sanctions, trade wars, and all those things going on, so that they're difficult to reach consensus. But even, if the United Nations reach the consensus, national security reach the consensus, U.S. says it doesn't have a binding power sometimes. So it's really absurd to see that happen, I mean, Security Council of the UN is really the bedrock of the world peace, and that is really the things we established after the Second World War. And now such a powerful countries form the United Nations Security Council can't stop a small regional war in Gaza. That's really absurd. I really think United Nations should strengthen its implementing power, actually, like UN peacekeeping force should be actively deployed, used in stop the Gaza fight. And that's really, I think, what we can do. And also, I mean, if the two-state solution, proposed by the European countries, recognized by also proposed by China, even U.S. do not object that. President Biden also says two-state solution. Why can't we implement that? I mean, there's a consensus for two-state solutions, and let's do it. Let's get a resolution on that to do it. So this is really fundamentally we have to solve that problem. Otherwise, it's really incompetent, not only for the domestic politics but international politics. We are paralyzed, and then we go to that ushers in some new challenges and a new crisis that are going to happen more. So we have to really put our acts together and stop this war and making peace immediately.
Such a powerful comment. Let me ask you a question more about a geostrategic picture in economics. Israel, the UAE, India, and the United States have announced a new effort to open a corridor from Asia to Europe. Maybe it's a different form of a Belt and Road initiative. Japan has announced a new global partnership with the United States they're looking at. Is China feeling any of that pressure, or are you feeling very comfortable with what you've got?
No, I think actually I view this as positively. 10 years ago, 10 to 15 years ago, nobody is thinking about global south or initiate any global development project. And China did that. 11 years ago, China proposed the Belt and Road Initiative, which is great. Now it's got a chain of reactions out of that. All the countries starting to really looking for this infrastructure deficit, global infrastructure deficit. So United States proposed Build Back Better World, B3W, and the EU proposed EU Global Gateway. And now we have the Indian, UAE, and Europe say, okay, Indian, Europe Economic Corridor. Great. If all the countries wants to put more investment, put more project into this, which would be very good. But the problem now, we see a lot of plans being proposed, but not really seeing much actions. For example, Belt and Road Initiative for the last decade, they invested over $1 trillion and built 3,000 projects for vast developing countries. So what are the other countries' concrete results? We're yet to be seen. But I would like to see, if there's a consensus on the global infrastructure deficit, let's work together. BRI, B3W, EU Global Gateway, India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. Let's all combine that. Who to combine? Let's use the World Bank. Let's use the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, European Development Bank. Let's get those developed banks. They share similar charters, and why can't they work together? So I really see that climate change is one of the big consensus. Infrastructure deficit repair is another consensus. But let's work together. Rather than we all go in different directions, uncoordinated, and a lot of redundancy and waste. So I would really like to see we can work together. And China welcomes that. For Mr. Wang, he said, BRI is welcome B3W, EU Global Gateway, or other similar initiative to join hands. Let's work together. So that would be China's approach.
Henry, let me ask you a question about Russia-Ukraine, since you mentioned that. Do you suspect there are more things that China can do in terms of playing mediator, of nudging its friend without boundaries, Russia, and Ukraine, into an arrangement that would end the war and conflict between Russia and Ukraine? Where is your thinking in that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, China has gradually felt this is really got out of hand, because China said at the very beginning, when the war broke out, the sovereignty, territorial integrity should be respected. But when all our shots come to Beijing, President Xi said no nuclear weapons should be fought in Ukraine and should be utilized there. And then when President Macron came, President Xi called President Zelensky right after that. So China is really be a substantial player now into this. China have established envoy. Ambassador Li Hui was traveling to those related countries, and now we see, if this NATO and Western-led, coalition is really not able to really put an end to this war, then there's a global South is really getting very annoyed. Countries like Brazil, like Turkey, India, South Africa, they all want to mediate, want to do something. I think China is actually playing more role now to have a great terms with those non-conflicting countries.
Right.
Russia is fighting with NATO, with EU, but China and all the other global South is not fighting parties. So they could be really in a good position to be a mediator, to be a peacemaker. And I see that happening. China just issued a statement with the Brazilian, and Turkish foreign minister is in Beijing and agreed on many of those points. So I see more and more now China could be a peacemaker and mediator for this crisis. Of course, would love to work with U.S. and EU to work together, but the position of China is clear. If it's peacemaking, let's get all the conflict parties to the peacemaking, peace talking, or peace summit, rather than just one-sided. Let's get both sides to come to talk to how to end this war through dialogue, through negotiations, through communication. I think that is really the Chinese point.
Well, one of the questions is the BRICS itself paralyzed in its efforts? Are the tensions between India and China within BRICS keeping it from playing the role? Do you take the BRICS notion seriously as an alternative way to think about how power and, frankly, global problem solving gets done? And we'll make this our last question, but I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. I think this is a great question. Actually, you see that the BRICS represent economic globalization. That's actually the attraction. We see now the BRICS country doubled last year, and then we see the purchasing parity power of BRICS is already larger than G7, and of course also the BRICS. There's another 20-some countries lined up to join BRICS. And the Turkish foreign minister told me at CCG that he's going to attend the BRICS Plus summit next week sometime. So I think this is really important that even though there's ideologically or maybe the governing style may be different, but BRICS countries all favor economic globalization and favor economic development, and that's the attraction of BRICS countries. Whereas the other, all the other alliances are security over security emphasized or military alliance. We see the NATO expanded, we see Five Eyes, we see AUKUS, we see Quad, we see Camp David, you name it. All those economic alliances doesn't really produce the bread and butter, but really increase the military budget of all the countries. So I think the final really solution to that is we still have to keep the prosperity. And endanger the prosperity is the biggest risk we cannot really take. We have to avoid that risk. So de-risk the prosperity is really the biggest risk we are having now. So I think we have to really push continuously for the economic globalization prosperity. I think that's exactly what China is doing. China built a Belt and Road Initiative. China had the AIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. China joined the CPTPP, wants to join that, and China is part of the RCEP, the largest free trade agreement in the world. And China wants to have, all the economic cooperation summit with African, Latin American, ASEAN, Central Asia, Gulf countries. And China is the big country pursuing economic globalization. I see the BRICS actually likes that. They want to be part of this economic globalization continue. So I see the difference of this. BRICS is that even though they are not really so established, or there still needs a lot of room to improve. They are not perfect, but I think they represent the right trend of economic globalization continue. And of course, that is where all those BRICS countries, global South, can find now from the global North, because they don't care their economic development that much now, and then they care more about all those security issues, all those increased military budget, and all those issues, and that's where squeeze the global South. Now there's more people back to hunger, to poverty, and that's where I think BRICS represents a new alternative of economic globalization, where if we are not working together, that alternative will become more and more attractive.
Fascinating. Wang Huiyao, founder and president of the Center for China and Globalization, really appreciate you for joining us today. Thank you for your candor.
Thank you, Steve.
So what's the bottom line? Everybody hates the enforcer of the rules. But the hard truth is that the world needs enforcers, whether we like it or not. Why? Because some conflicts cut so deep that the warring antagonists just can't find the balance that delivers safety and justice from each other. So the enforcers make global rules, which of course tilt in their favor. For almost a century, the U.S. has believed that it alone is the premier diplomatic, economic, and security force solving global disputes. And of course, it resolves things its way. But more recently, other countries are entering the field. China's reasons are clear: geopolitical competition with the United States. I don't think China has deep roots and concerns about either Palestine or Israel. But on the other hand, if it can get some credit with Arab states and Iran by playing a balancing role in the crisis, then all the better. And that's the bottom line.